The burning sea stretched endlessly beneath George Gay's floating body. Oil slicks caught sunlight like black mirrors. 4 massive carriers belched smoke into the Pacific sky. His squadron was gone. Every single one of them. But their deaths had just changed the war forever. The Devastator earned its nickname through bitter irony. It devastated only those who flew it. Picture strapping yourself into a flying coffin. Your weapon would malfunction. Your speed would crawl. Your armor would crumple like paper. At midway, 15 brave souls climbed aboard these death traps. Half an hour later, only one man bobbed alive in the waves. America had sent its finest pilots to certain doom. Yet from this massacre came the spark that ignited victory. This was no accident of fate. 2 naval philosophies were about to collide. One clung desperately to yesterday's dreams. The other raced toward tomorrow's reality. The Americans still believed in floating fortresses. Admirals fantasized about thundering 16-inch guns. Steel leviathans would decide the future of empires. Aircraft were merely servants. They softened targets. They harassed formations. Then they stepped aside for the real weapons. Speed meant nothing in this doctrine. Maneuverability was secondary. Survival was optional. Only obedience to the battleship mattered. This backward thinking birthed the TBD Devastator. Navy brass called it their torpedo bomber destroyer. The name promised annihilation of enemy fleets. Reality delivered something far different. 200 miles per hour was its maximum speed. It limped across hostile skies. Its skin was thinner than a beer can. Japanese 20-millimeter cannons shredded it like tissue paper. One pilot described the experience perfectly. Flying the Devastator into combat was like bringing a broken knife to a gunfight. The knife was already snapped in half. Japan embraced the same decisive battle theory, but they twisted it with deadly efficiency. Their carriers became floating airfields. The Mitsubishi A6M-0 ruled their skies. Everything the Devastator was not, the Zero embodied. Swift as lightning, deadly as a viper, agile as a hunting hawk. Chinese battlefields had forged these pilots into aerial samurai. Invincibility flowed through their veins like sacred blood. American torpedo bombers looked like turkeys to them. Slow, fat birds waiting for slaughter. But the cruelest joke was the weapon itself. The Mark 13 torpedo weighed 2,200 pounds of supposed destruction. On paper, it could gut any battleship. In reality, it was a drunken snake. It dove too deep. It wandered off course. It refused to explode when it did hit. Pilots cursed its name daily. Lieutenant John Waldron commanded Torpedo Squadron 8. He would soon lead his men into oblivion. His letters home spoke of prophetic dread. We fight with weapons that fail more than they strike. God help us when that day arrives. Coral Sea had already shown the signs. Torpedo runs collapsed. The Mark 13 betrayed everyone who trusted it. Yet High Command clung to false hope. Courage could overcome obsolete machinery. Mass production would outlast Japanese skill. Every man strapping into a Devastator knew better. He was climbing aboard a museum piece. America, the industrial giant, sent boys into modern combat with ancient tools. Japan unleashed elite warriors on wings of perfection. One nation bet on quantity. The other trusted quality. Between them flew the Devastators. Too old for the future. Too fragile for the present. Yet men still climbed inside. They tightened their harnesses. They pressed their lips into thin lines. Their engines sounded more like prayers than machines. They knew this mission was suicide. Someone had to take the first step into hell. The tragedy was not just burning wreckage. It was the doctrine that condemned these men before they ever left the deck. June 4, 1942. Dawn broke over the USS Hornet's trembling deck. Engines coughed and sputtered. Wings rattled in the sea breeze. 15 TBD Devastators sat in perfect formation. Each carried a Mark 13 torpedo slung beneath its belly. Each weapon was as reliable as loaded dice. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron stood before his men. Sioux blood ran hot in his veins. Fire burned in his dark eyes. Intelligence reports told the brutal truth. Japanese carriers waited ahead. Zeros would fall like steel hawks. The Devastators would die like sheep. Yet Waldron spoke with quiet determination. Anyone claiming 50-50 odds is lying. Our chances are much worse. But we will attack anyway. We clear the path for others. The order crackled over the radio. Throttles slammed forward. Ancient engines roared their ragged chorus. Modern fighters screamed with polished precision. One by one, the Devastators crawled down the deck. They lifted into humid morning air. No wildcat escorts rose beside them. They flew alone into destiny. 15 men against an entire empire. Hours passed in radio silence. Only engines and static filled their headsets. The Pacific shimmered blue and empty below. Then dark shapes appeared on the distant horizon. Nagamo's Kido Butai materialized like a deadly mirage. 4 carriers surrounded by cruisers and destroyers. A floating fortress at sea. Waldron's voice cut through the static. "There they are, boys. We attack now. Follow me straight in." The Devastators dropped to wave top level. They skimmed the ocean spray. To deliver torpedoes, they had to fly straight. Low. Impossibly slow. It was execution in broad daylight. Above them the sky shimmered. Then it tore open completely. Zeros poured down like falling knives. Sunlight flashed on their wings. Cannons blazed with deadly fire. The Devastator could not climb fast enough. It could not turn sharply enough. It could only absorb punishment. Bullets ripped through thin aluminum skin. Fuel tanks exploded into orange flame. Engines disintegrated under cannon fire. Japanese pilot Saburo Sakai later confessed his shame. It felt like hunting defenseless birds. They could not evade us. We fired, and they simply vanished. Minutes destroyed the entire formation. Waldron's aircraft shredded apart first. It plunged into the sea, trailing fire. One by one, his squadron followed. Smoke trails twisted skyward like dying prayers. Ensign George Gay watched the massacre unfold, his torpedo released into empty water. He pulled up just enough to see his commander die. The ocean filled with burning wreckage. His friends disappeared in seconds. His own Devastator took fatal hits. He bailed out at the last moment. The water was warm as he surfaced. His inflatable cushion kept him afloat. Around him, the sea burned with aviation fuel. 15 Devastators had attacked. None survived the assault. 30 men went in. Only George Gay came back alive. The horror seemed complete and meaningless. Yet something unexpected was happening. The Zeros had been drawn down to sea level. Japanese gunners focused on dodging torpedoes. 14,000 feet of empty sky stretched above them. Unguarded. Unnoticed. That revelation would matter soon. For now, the Devastators were gone. Their bodies fed Pacific fish. Their sacrifice appeared worthless. But in their fiery deaths, they had cracked something vital. The Kido Butai's perfect shield now had gaps. They had forced enemy eyes downward. They had created chaos from order. One survivor whispered years later, "We never struck their carriers. We never sank their ships. But without us, the dive bombers would never have had their chance. Torpedo Squadron 8 ended in annihilation. Not victory, but sacrifice. Not glory, but death. Yet in their ashes, history began to turn. The ocean still boiled with smoke and wreckage. Oil slicks spread like black blood. To the Japanese, this looked like simple massacre, easy swatting of fragile intruders. Nagumo's carriers reformed their defensive screen. The threat seemed eliminated completely. Zeros circled low in triumphant formation, predators who had feasted on helpless prey. But 14,000 feet above them, fate was moving. SBD Dauntless dive bombers appeared like silent hawks. Their engines ran quiet compared to the chaos below. Wings caught morning sunlight. They seemed made of fire itself. 20 long minutes they had searched the Pacific. Only instinct and desperate calculation guided them. Now they found themselves perfectly positioned, directly above the heart of Japanese power. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey led the formation. His voice carried destiny's weight. "There is the enemy below us. Attack immediately." The Dauntless was no fragile relic. It was steel vengeance forged in American factories. Its name promised what it delivered: fearless descent, unstoppable force. To strike it did not crawl. It plummeted like a falling star. At 10:22 a.m. the sky split open. Dozens of dauntless bombers folded their wings. They fell from heaven like avenging angels. Engines screamed as they knifed through thin air. 70-degree dives sent them racing toward the ocean. Japanese lookouts spotted them too late. Below lay the carriers Akagikaga and Soryu, their decks cluttered with fuel hoses and bombs. Half-rearmed aircraft sat in vulnerable rows. Crews preparing the next strike had no time to clear the chaos. They stared in horror as shadows fell. American angels of death riding steel wings. Bomb bay doors opened wide. 1,000-pound bombs tumbled downward. Black specks growing larger and hungrier. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then came the impacts. First bombs slammed into Kaga's flight deck. Fire blossomed instantly through parked aircraft. Second bomb tore into Akagi's hangar. Fuel and ammunition ignited like a volcano. Soryu shuddered under 3 direct hits. Her decks split open. Her bow belched flame skyward. Captain Fujita Mitsuo survived Pearl Harbor. He described this scene with one word: hell. No other word existed. Sailors engulfed before they could scream. Pilots burned alive in cockpits they could not escape. Bombs stacked in hangars detonated in chain reactions. Thunder shook the sea itself. Proud carriers became floating furnaces. 6 minutes erased Japanese naval power. By 10:28 a.m., 3 frontline carriers lay fatally crippled. Flames rose thousands of feet high. Smoke curled like black tombstones against blue sky. All because the Zeros had been lured downward. All because the Devastators forced enemy attention to the waves. The slaughter of 3 torpedo squadrons revealed its hidden purpose. Their deaths opened doors that could never close. Hours later, the 4th carrier Hiryu met identical fate. More dauntless attacks hunted and struck her. The once invincible Kido Butai lay shattered. Terror of the Pacific became 4 burning hulks. From his dive bomber cockpit, one pilot later said, "When I looked down, I saw 4 giants burning." I realized the Pacific had changed hands forever. The breakthrough was not just destroyed ships. It was destroyed myth. Japan could be stopped. Japan could be beaten. 6 minutes proved empires could fall. But history remained cruel to heroes. The Dauntless received all the glory. Headlines celebrated bombers that turned carriers into fire. Few remembered broken Devastator wings, silent beneath the sea. Their sacrifice made victory possible. The breakthrough was written in fire, but paid for in blood long before bombs fell. Smoke over Midway lingered for hours. 4 carriers of the invincible Kido Butai lay broken and burning. The Pacific, once belonging to the rising sun, now belonged to flames of defeat. But true consequences ran deeper than sunken ships. Irreplaceable men were lost. Elite pilots who struck Pearl Harbor died in fire. Veterans from China to Coral Sea perished trapped in cockpits, swallowed by explosions that lit the sky. Their deaths cut deeper than any hull. Without them, Japanese carriers became hollow shells. One Imperial Navy admiral later confessed, "At Midway, we lost more than ships. We lost the teachers, the leaders, the experience no factory could replace." After that day we sent boys against American machines, America learned fast from funeral fires. Midway buried the Devastator doctrine forever. It birthed new naval aviation thinking. Survival required speed, altitude, and overwhelming firepower. Slow torpedo planes and unreliable weapons were swept away. From that crucible came the F-6F Hellcat. If the Devastator was a coffin with wings, the Hellcat was flying fortress of vengeance. 2,000 horsepower engines thundered like gods. Armor-wrapped cockpits like steel blankets. 650 caliber Brownings bristled from each wing. They spit death like chainsaws through enemy formations. Against fragile Zeros, the Hellcat was merciless. Pilots no longer prayed to survive. They hunted with predator instincts. Kill ratios told the brutal truth. 19-1 in America's favor. The Japanese Zero, once terror of Pacific skies, became a ghost of faded glory. Fast and elegant, but fragile as glass. Against Hellcat fury it shattered instantly. Samurai spirit could not stop industrial vengeance. The old creed died with the carriers at Midway. What of the men who paid for this lesson? Torpedo Squadron 8 ceased to exist completely. 15 aircraft launched. None returned home. 30 men gave everything so others could strike. Only Ensign George Gay, clinging to his life raft, survived to tell their story. Hidden among burning wreckage, he watched carriers collapse. He watched enemies who destroyed his friends fall under dauntless bombs. His eyes carried the last testimony. Years later, Gay recalled the silence perfectly. I floated completely alone. The sea was black with oil. In the distance, 4 carriers burned like hell itself. My squadron was gone forever. But I knew their deaths opened the door to that fire. This was Midway's cruel paradox. The Devastator achieved nothing directly. No torpedo struck true, no ship sank by their hand. Yet their destruction achieved everything. They shattered Japanese defense formations. They created gaps through which victory poured. Midway became the Pacific War's turning point. Japan never recovered its losses. America never looked back again. The future belonged to steel titans. Hellcats and corsairs ruled tomorrow's skies. Yet beneath those triumphs echoes quiet sacrifice. Devastators won no glory for themselves. They never lived to see their nation rise. But in death, they changed history forever. Their legacy was not ships destroyed, but fire they made possible. The Pacific still holds their wrecks, silent tombs resting beneath endless waves. Every time history speaks of Midway, it whispers their names, Waldron and his men. VT-8. They were never forgotten. They were victory's price. Midway was funeral and rebirth combined. That morning, the TBD Devastator died in flames. But from its fiery grave, American naval aviation's future was born. The lesson burned brutal and unforgettable. Obsolete weapons had no place in modern warfare. The Mark 13 torpedo, slow torpedo bombers, false comfort of outdated doctrine, all swept away in blood and fire. From that crucible emerged new creed: speed, altitude, armor, overwhelming firepower. These became sacred words. For Japan, Midway was invincibility's funeral. 4 carriers gone in 6 minutes. Hundreds of veteran pilots lost forever. The Zero, once feared, was now hunted prey. The Empire had reached too far across the Pacific. In one day, its wings were clipped permanently. For Americans, Midway was courage's ultimate price. 3 torpedo squadrons flew, knowing they would never return. Their torpedoes failed completely. Their planes fell apart in flames, but their sacrifice tilted history's balance. By pulling Zeros downward, they opened sky for dive bombers. By dying first, they cleared victory's path. Ensign George Gay became their voice. He floated alone, watching horizons glow with fire. Years later, his words still echo. I was the only one left breathing, but I knew they had not died in vain. Those carriers burned because my squadron went in first. The Devastator never achieved glory in battle. It will never be remembered for victories won, only for men who climbed inside knowing it meant death. Yet, that became its truest legacy. Proof that courage transforms failure into triumph, that sacrifice carves paths for others to strike. History crowns the dauntless Hellcat and Corsair. But beneath those crowns lies Devastator's shadow. Without its fall, there could be no rise. Without its sacrifice, no Midway victory existed. So when we speak of Midway, we must speak of them. Not as relics or failures, but as the first blow that cracked Empire's armor. Their story was not defeat. It was men facing certain death who flew anyway. The Devastator was never a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of sacrifice, pure and simple. In that sacrifice, it achieved what no bomb, no torpedo, no bullet could ever accomplish. It changed the course of global war forever. The Pacific remembers their courage. History remembers their sacrifice. And so should we all.